Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is the part 2nd of the tutorial writing JUnit test cases for Spring Boot application. In the part 1, we discussed about writing the JUnit test cases for the repository layer. In case if you missed that video, the link will be given in the description section of this video. Make sure to watch that video before proceeding this video. In this video, we're going to write the JUnit test cases for the service layer. We're going to create a service which is movie service, and we're going to create a bunch of methods which will call the repository methods, and then we are going to write the JUnit test cases. We are going to use Mockito along with JUnit to test the service layer. Mockito is a Java testing framework. Using that we can mock the objects and we can test the test cases. The reason why we are going to use Mockito is we are not going to test the real implementation methods. Instead, we are going to provide a fake implementation, and we're going to test the methods. We are going to tell that Mockito, whenever a method is called, what should be the return value. We're going to provide the fake return value, and we're going to tell whenever this method is called, this will be the response. We're going to provide the fake implementation, and we're going to test those test cases. We're going to test those responses. That is why we're going to use the Mockito. Along the way, we're going to learn about the Mockito annotations like @mock and @inject mocks, how to inject the mock objects, how to mock the Java objects, and also we're going to learn about how we can write the efficient test cases for the service layer. So this is going to be a really interesting. Let's get started. So in interest of time, I have already created the service layer, which is movie service. If you open this movie service, we have added the @service annotation, and also we have added the required args constructor annotation. We have injected the movie repository into this service class. Inside this, we have created the save method, get all movies, get movie by ID, update movie, and delete movie. And inside these methods, we are just calling the repository method, which is save, find all, find by ID, and save, and also delete. Pretty much a normal Spring Boot service layer. In case if you are already familiar with this, you can easily relate to this. In case if you are new to Spring Boot application, I highly recommend you to check out my videos where I have already created how to create the REST APIs and how to create the service layer inside the Spring Boot application. Now we have this movie service. All we need to do is we need to start writing the JUnit test cases for this movie service. What I'll do is inside the source test Java, I'm going to create a new package. Let's call this service. And inside this, create a new class, or also you can create the JUnit class. I'm going to create a Java class. Let's call this movie service test. Let me expand this. Now, in order to test our movie service class, of course, we need the movie service. So let's create a reference variable for the movie service. Movie service. Let's call this movie service. And if you look at the movie service, it's dependent on the movie repository. So let's create a reference variable for the movie repository as well. Movie repository. Let's call this movie repository. Now let's create the JUnit test case. We're going to create the JUnit test case for the save method. So void save, and we need to add the test annotation. Also, we can add the display name annotation to provide the custom name for the test case. Should save the movie object to database. Inside this, we will test the JUnit test case. So first of all, if you look at this movie service is actually not, we are going to call the movie service methods. So we need the instance of this movie service class. but we are not going to use the auto-add annotation. Instead, we are going to use the Mockito annotation. Just like I said before, we are going to provide the fake implementation. So we are going to use one of the Mockito annotation, which is inject mocks. And for this movie repository, we are going to use the mock annotation. So this mock annotation is going to mock this movie repository. Like I said before, we are not going to test the real implementation. We are going to provide a fake implementation. So we need to provide a fake implementation for this movie repository. So we are going to provide the we are going to create a mock object for this movie repository. For that, we are going to use the mock annotation, and this inject mocks, it is going to create an instance of the movie service, and it is going to inject the movie repository. This movie repository is of course a mock object. This basically, we're going to use this inject mocks is to inject the mock object to this movie service, because this movie service is dependent on the movie repository. So we are going to first create the mock object of the dependent class, which is movie repository, and we are going to inject this dependent mock object to this movie service. This inject mocks is going to create an instance of this movie service, and it is going to inject the mocked objects to this movie service. That's it. And inside this, we are going to create the movie object. So let's create a movie object. What I'll do is, let's go to our previous test cases. Let's go to the repository, movie repository test. Just copy this avatar movie object and paste it. Let's provide movie, and also we are going to set the ID as well, avatar movie dot set ID, which is 1, and we need to append L because that will be a long. Okay, now we have the movie object. Now we need to tell Mockito that Mockito, whenever the movie repository calls the save method, it should return this avatar movie object as a response. For that, we're going to use when method. When movie repository dot save method call the whenever the save method is called, and for this save method we are going to pass the movie object. So whenever the movie repository dot save method is called, we have to return the avatar movie object back. And for this, what we are going to do is, we are not going to directly pass this avatar movie. Instead, we are going to use any. Let's use any from the Mockito package. So what I'll do is, I'll go to the above and let's import the any from argument matchers, and now any, and we're going to pass the movie class, movie.class. Basically what we are trying to do is, whenever the movie repository calls the save method, and for this save method we need to pass the movie object. So any movie object is passed to this save method, then we need to return the avatar movie. We are just stubbing this method, we are just stubbing this save method. We are not going to test the real implementation of this save method. Instead, we are going to stub this save method. We are going to provide the fake implementation for this save method, which is whenever the movie repository calls the save method and it should pass the movie object, any movie object, then it should return the avatar movie object as a response. That is what the then return will do. Once we have done all of this, what we need to do is, we are going to call the service method using the movie service dot save, and to this save method we are going to pass the avatar movie. We're going to pass the avatar movie which we have created above, and this will return the new movie object, new movie. Now we are going to assert this using the assertion. So assert not null, not null. We're going to pass this new movie. We're going to check this new movie should not be null, and also we're going to check assert that. We're going to pass this new movie dot get name. We're going to check equals or is equal to. We're going to check with the movie name, that is avatar. Now let's save this. So now we have returned the test case for the save method. What we have done is we have created the movie object, and also we tell Mockito that whenever the movie repository.save method is called, and to this save method we can pass any movie object. Whenever we pass the movie object to this save method, then we have to return this avatar movie which we have set up at the above. And we now after that we have stubbed this method. Now we have stubbed this save method, and now when we call the movie service method, which is save method, and we are going to pass the avatar movie, that will gives us the new movie object. It is going to test the method which is the movie service method. It is going to test it, and inside this movie service, if you look at this, we are calling the movie repository save method, and we have already stubbed this method. Whenever the movie repository save method is called, we're going to return the fake value, which is we are going to provide the dummy. We are going to return the dummy value or the dummy object, which is the avatar movie. And at last we are going to assert the values, assert the object using the assert not null and assert that. We're going to check assert not null, and we're going to pass the object. We're going to check the object is not null, and also we're going to check the object, one of the property which is name property contains the name avatar. So with this, save the file and select the method, right click, choose run as, choose JUnit test. Our test case should pass, but for some reason it is failing. I know that because we are using the Mockito annotations, that is inject mocks and @inject mock @mocks. If you are using these annotations, then this class should also contains the annotation. We have to use the annotation that is extend with. So let's use extend with, and we need to provide the class name, that is Mockito extension.class, Mockito extension.class. Save this. Now when you run the test case, our test case should pass. We should see the green bar. Let's verify that. You can see we should see the green bar. Our test case has passed. So what we have done is we have created this movie service test, and we have added the annotation extend with, because we are using the Mockito annotations. We have used the inject mocks and the mock annotation. So the mock annotation will mock the object, which is the movie repository, and inject mocks, it is going to create an instance of the movie service, and it is going to inject the mocked objects, which is movie repository. And we have created the test case, that is save, and we have created the movie object, and also we have stubbed the method, which is the save method, using when and then return. And we have called the service method using the movie service, and we have assert the object. We have verified the expected result is correct or not using the assert not null and assert that. Now we have returned the JUnit test case for this save method. Now let's continue with the other methods as well. So now let's go ahead and write the JUnit test case for this get all movies. So inside this, create a method void get movies. let's add the annotation test. Also add the display name annotation to provide the custom name for our test case, that is should return list of movies with size 2. Inside this, first we need to set up the data that are required for our test case. I'll just copy this. So copy this and paste it. We need one more movie. Let's go to the movie repository test and copy this Titanic movie object. Paste it. We can create a movie object using movie. We need to provide the ID as well, Titanic movie.set ID to the ID is 2. Let's save this. So now we have set up the data that are required for our test case. Now we need to stub the method. For that we are going to use when. Before that we need to add these movie objects to the list. So let's create a list which is of type movie. Let's call this list new array list. Let's import the list from util package. List.add Titanic movie. Also list.add Avatar movie. Now we have added these two movies to the list. Next we can stub the method when movie repository. So this movie repository called the find all method, because if you go to the movie service, inside this get all movies we are calling the find all method. So we have to stub this method. Let's go inside this movie service test. When movie repository call the find all method, then we have to return the list which we have set up above. Then we have to use then return we have to list. And now we can verify whether the expected result is correct or not using assertions. So we're going to use assert equals. The expected is 2 and the actual is, so okay, before that I forgot to call the service method. So let's make use of the movie service dot find all, or what is the name of this, get all movies. So get all movies, this is going to return the list of movies. Let's call this list of movies. Now we can verify the size of the movies. Movies.size, this will gives us the size of the movie. Now we can use assert not null. We can pass the movies. So save this. So what we have done is we have set up the data. We have created two movie objects, the Avatar movie and the Titanic movie. And next we have created a list, array list, and we have added the movies to the array list. Now the list contains the size is 2, and now we have stubbed the method using when and then return. So when movie repository called the find all method, we have to return the list which we have set up above. And at last we have used the movie service to call the get all movies service method, and we have verify whether the expected result is correct or not using the assertions. We have used assert equals and assert not null. With this, save the file and select the test case, right click, choose run as, choose JUnit test. We should see the green bar. You can see should return list of movies with size 2. We should see the green bar. Now that we have written a JUnit test case for get all movies, let's move on with the next test case. So let's go to the movie service. The next we are going to write the JUnit test case for this method, which is get movie by ID. Let's go to the movie service test. And before we writing the unit test case, if you look at this implementation, there are two things can happen. One, either we get the movie object or it should throw an exception, that is runtime exception. So in this case, we have to write two test cases. One is to get the movie object and another one is to throw the exception. Let's go to the movie service test and let's write the JUnit test case for returning the movie object by its ID. Void, I'm going to call this get movie by ID. Let's add the annotation test, and inside this, first we need to set up the data that are required for our test case. So I'm going to copy this movie object and paste it. And once we have done that, we need to stub the method. If you go to the movie service, we are calling the find by ID method. We need to stub this method. Inside the movie service test, we are going to make use of the when movie repository dot find by ID, and to this we are going to pass the ID. What I'll do is I'm going to call any long. So if you pass any long method, what I'll do is just go to the top, expand this similar to this any. We are going to import the any long, and in the down we're going to call any long. So if you pass any long value to this find by ID method, then we should return this movie object itself. So let's pass avatar movie, but this is an optional of type. This is going to return the optional of type. So I'm going to cut this. Let's make use of the optional.off and we will pass the avatar movie object. So now we have stubbed the method. All we need to do is we need to call the service method movie service dot find, not find, it's get movie by ID, and to this we need to pass the ID. What I'll do is I'm going to pass the movie ID, which is 1. This is going to return a movie object. I'm going to call this existing movie, and in the down, once we get this existing movie, we're going to verify whether this result is correct or not using the assertion. So let's make use of the assert not null, and we're going to pass the object existing movie. And similarly, assert that, we're going to verify assert that. Let's pass existing movie dot get ID is equal to 1. Save this. Now we can run the test case. Before that, let's add the display name annotation to provide the custom name for the test case. Should return the movie object. Save this. Now select the JUnit test case and right click, choose run as and JUnit test. We should see the green bar. You can see should return the movie object, and our test case is passed. So let's recap. What we have done is we have written a JUnit test case for this get movie by ID, and this implementation if you look at the implementation, there are two things can happen. One, either we get the movie object or we get the runtime exception. So now we have to write two test cases. So far we have written a single test case for this scenario, that is returning the movie object by its ID. We need to stub the find by ID method, and inside the movie service test we have set up the data that are required for our test case, and we have stubbed the method find by ID, and we pass it the any long value to this find by ID, and we have returned the avatar movie object as a response. We have stubbed the find by ID method. We have provided the fake implementation, and finally we have called the get movie by ID service method using the movie service. This will return the existing movie, and once we get the result, we are going to verify whether the response is correct or not using the assert not null and assert that. And when we run the test case, we should see the green bar. Now that we have written a JUnit test case for returning the movie object, now let's write one more JUnit test case for the another scenario, that is throwing the exception. Void, I'm going to call this get movie by ID for exception. Let's add the test annotation. Let's also add display name annotation to provide the custom name for the test case. Should throw the exception. Inside this we need to set up the data that are required for our test case. So copy this and paste it. Next, we need to stub the method. We need to stub the find by ID method. When movie repository dot find by ID, we're going to pass the ID. We're going to stub this find by ID method. So for this we are going to pass the ID, that is, if you look at this, we have set up the movie object which is of the ID which is 1, and here we are going to pass the ID 2, or we can also pass the ID. Let's say what we'll do is, okay, we will pass the ID 2 which is of type long, and then we should return the avatar movie itself, the avatar movie object itself. We can make use of this optional of, let's pass the avatar movie object. So when the movie repository find by ID method is called and we have passed the ID which is 2, and whenever we pass this, it should return the avatar movie object itself. Okay, I think this is, instead of 2, let's pass 1, the ID 1, because we are returning the avatar movie object back, and the ID of that avatar movie is 1. And inside this, what we are going to do is, now we have to call the service method. So in order to call the service method, we are going to make use of the assert throws, because we have to throw the exception. We have to write a test case for throwing the exception. So assert throws, and inside this, what we're going to do is, we're going to provide the exception name, that is runtime exception dot class, which is the first parameter. The second parameter is a lambda expression. Inside this, we are going to make use of the movie service to call the service method, that is get movie by ID, and we are going to pass the movie ID. What I'll do is, I'm going to directly pass the ID 2, which is of type long. If you look at this, here we are calling the get movie by ID, and for this we are going to pass the movie ID 2, but here we are stubbing the method find by ID with, we are passing the movie ID as 1. So this will throw the exception as expected, and we are verifying that the exception is runtime exception. So that's all about writing the JUnit test case for handling the exceptions. So with this, now save this, and also I'm going to add the semicolon. So let's save this, and now if you select this test case and choose run JUnit test case, we should see the green bar. You can see we should see the green bar, which means it has throw the exception, and the exception is runtime exception, and it verifies that the result is expected, because inside this service we are throwing the runtime exception whenever the ID is not found. And here also it is happening same, because we are passing the ID movie ID 2, and here we are stubbing the find by ID method with a movie ID 1. So when we pass this, it is going to not able to find the ID 2, and it is going to throw the runtime exception, and we are going to verify that assert throws runtime exception, which will pass the test case. Let's say for example I'm going to pass 1 instead of 2. Let's save this. Now this time we are stubbing the same method with the movie ID 1, and also here calling the service method by 1 as a movie ID. This time it will not throw the exception, it will return the movie object, but here we are verifying it should throw the runtime exception, but in this case it will not throw the exception and our test case will fail. We can verify that. Select this, choose run as and JUnit test. We should see the exception. You can see, let me expand this. You can see expected runtime exception to be thrown, but nothing was thrown, so our test case has been failed. Okay, now you understand about how we can handle the exceptions, how we can write the test cases for handling the exceptions. So now I'm going to change this back to 2, save this. We can run the test case again, and we should see the green bar. You can see we should get the green bar. Now that we have written a test case for get movie by ID, we have written the test case for 2 scenarios. Now we have to write the JUnit test case for updating the movie. Let's go to the movie service, and if you look at this update movie method, inside this we are actually calling 2 movie repository methods. One is find by ID and this save method. So we need to stub these 2 methods. Let's go to the movie service test, and inside this let's start writing the JUnit test case. Void update movie. We need to add the test annotation. We'll also add display name annotation. Let's provide the custom name for the JUnit test case. Should update the movie into the database. Inside this, first we need to set up the data that are required for our test case. I'm going to copy this and paste it. Once we set up the data, next we need to stub the method when movie repository dot find by ID, find by ID, and we can call any long. We have to pass the long to this find by ID, so we can pass any long type. Then we have to return the avatar movie. We are going to make use of this optional of and avatar movie, which is our movie object. Next we have to stub the save method as well. When movie repository dot save, and we're going to make use of this any, and if to this save method, if you pass any movie object, movie dot class, then we have to return the avatar movie object back. Okay, now we have stubbed these 2 methods. Now we have to call the service method, and before that we have to, before calling the service method, we have to update the movie object. So we have to update any of the values. So avatar movie dot set, we're going to update the genre. Instead of action, we are going to set this to fantasy. Now we have updated this avatar movie. Now let's make use of the movie service dot update movie, and to this we are going to pass the avatar movie, and also we need to pass the ID as well. So ID, I'm going to pass, let's say 1, and this is going to return the movie back. Movie, I'm going to call this existing movie, or we can call updated movie. Once we get this updated movie object back, we can verify using the assertion. So assert not null, updated movie. Also we're going to assert equals, we're going to verify because we have updated the genre. So we can verify the expected is fantasy, and actual is updated movie dot get genre. Save this. Now when we select the test case and when we run the test case, we should see the green bar. You can see we should get the green bar. Our test case has been passed. So what we have done is we have set up the data that are required for our test case, and we have stubbed the methods find by ID and save method, because inside the movie service update movie method we are calling the two methods, that is find by ID and save method. So we have to stub these two methods. We're going to provide a fake implementation for these two methods. That's what we have done using the when and then return. You can also use given and will return instead of the when and then return. That is also completely fine, but I'm using the when and then return. And we have updated the genre to fantasy instead of the action. And finally we have called the movie service method, that is update movie, and we have passed the object which we want to update, and also we are going to pass the ID which is 1, the movie ID 1, and that will return the updated movie. And once we get the updated movie, we have verified the result, whether the result is correct or not, using the assert not null and assert equals. And when we run the test case, we should get the green bar. Our test case is passed. Now let's write a JUnit test case for deleting the movie. Let's go to the movie service, and inside this delete movie method, we are calling the find by ID method as well as the delete method. So we need to stub these two methods. So let's go to the service test class. Before that, if you look at this method, it is going to return void. So if you think that like how we can test, what we can how to do the assertions for the return value, because this method does not return anything, then how we can verify that? So there is a way we can do that. Let's see how we can do that. Let's go to the movie service test and let's create a method void delete movie. We can add the annotation @test. Also let's add display name annotation, and we can provide the custom name should delete the movie from database. And inside this, first of all, we're going to set up the data that are required for our test case. Let's copy this movie object and paste it. Next, like I said before, we have to stub two methods. One is find by ID and another one is delete. But if you look at the delete method, delete method, this is not going to return anything. This is going to return void. So let's see how we can stub this method. When movie repository dot find by ID, and we're going to pass any long. So if you pass any long to this find by ID, then we have to return the avatar movie. So let's make use of the optional of the movie object, which is avatar movie. Now we have stubbed the find by ID method. Now for the delete method, what we are going to do is we are going to use do nothing, because when we call the delete method, it should return void, right? So in that case, we will not get anything. So we have to call a method do nothing dot when we call the movie repository, we're going to call the delete method. And when we call the delete method, we're going to pass the movie object which we want to delete. So let's make use of this any, and to this we're going to pass any movie object. So movie.class, that's it. So when we call the movie repository delete method to passing the movie object as a parameter, we have to do nothing. So we are going to call this do nothing method before the when method. On this we're going to call when and delete. So it's a simple understanding, right? It's simply English statement. So when we call the delete method, should not return anything, so it should not do anything. So that is what the do nothing. And at last we need to call the movie service dot delete, and for this delete movie we are going to pass the ID. I'm going to pass the ID which is 1, and finally once we have done that, like I said before, this is not going to return anything. Okay, like we can't do anything like assert not null, assert that, because this will not return anything. So what we can do is we can verify whether this method is called or not. Okay, whether the movie repository is called or not, this movie repository delete method is called or not, we can verify that. So verify, we are going to make use of this verify, and movie repository, we can check how many times that has been called. We are going to use times, and we're going to pass 1. Okay, it should be called 1 time. So delete, and we're going to pass the object name which is avatar movie. So let's save this. So we need to tell that the movie repository method is called the delete method, and we're going to pass the avatar movie. When this has been called, whether it is called or not, we're going to verify that. If it is called, it has been called how many times? We are expecting that it should be called 1 time. So let's save this. With this, select the test case, right click, choose run as JUnit test case. We should see the green bar. You can see our test case has been passed. Hope you understand that. It's quite difficult for me to explain what is happening here, but by looking at the code you can easily understand. We have set up the data that are required for our test case. We have set up the movie object, and then we have stubbed the find by ID method, and also we have stubbed the delete method as well. But the delete method will return void. So in order to stub the delete void methods, we are going to call this do nothing method, because as soon as we call those methods, it should not do anything. So that's why we are going to call this do nothing method. And at last we are going to call the service method delete movie, and we're going to pass the ID which we want to delete using the ID. And finally what we're going to do is we're going to verify, because this we cannot do any assertions, because this is going to return when we delete the movie, we are going to return nothing, we will get the void. So because of that, we are going to verify whether the movie repository delete method is called or not. If it is called, how many times it is going to call, that we're going to verify it. So we have provided the times of 1, whether it has been called 1 time or not. That is what we're going to verify it here. And when we run the test case, we should get the green bar. Our test case is running as expected. Now that we have written test cases for all the service methods, and let's actually run this JUnit test class one at last time. Instead of running the individual test cases, let's run the JUnit test class, and we should get all the test cases to be passed. So right click on this, choose run as, and JUnit test. We should see the green bar, and all the test cases should be passed. You can see we are getting the green bar, and all the test cases has been passed. Now what we can do is we can refactor these methods, because in every method we are actually setting up the same data. So instead of setting up the data in each and every test case, what we can do is we can make use of the JUnit lifecycle method, much like how we have used inside the repository test JUnit class. we're going to use the add before each, and we can set up the data. So each time before running the test case, it is going to set up the data for us. So let's do that. I'll just copy this and inside the movie service test at the very top, paste it. And also let's go to this movie repository test, copy these private fields and paste it. Now we get the two objects, the Avatar movie as well as the Titanic movie. So now we can get rid of all of this. So let's get rid of this. Similarly, let's remove these as well. And inside this get movie by ID, remove the setting up the data. Similarly, inside the get by ID, get movie by ID for exception, we can get rid of the data that we have set up. I'll do the same thing for all these methods. Now we have removed the code, the repetitive code. We can test it one last time. So let's save this. Now, okay, we are getting some exception. Okay, that is some typo error. So let's save this. So now when we right click on this, choose run as, choose JUnit test, all of our test cases should be passed. We should see the green bar. Okay, one of the method is getting failed, that is actual not to be null. Okay, which is that? We can verify that. Should return a movie, should return the movie object, should return the movie object, should return the movie object. Okay, so this is the one that we are expecting. Okay, what we have done is, here we are not setting the ID. Okay, because we have copied from the movie repository test. Here we are not setting the ID. So let's set the ID, avatar movie dot set ID 1, and we can also set the ID for the Titanic movie. So Titanic movie set ID 2. Save this. Now when we run the JUnit test case, we should see the green bar. All our test case should be passed. You can see all of our test case has been passed. We should get the green bar.